Hey everybody, it's Peter, and this is going to be a fun one. In this video, we're going to compare, sort of, the 2024 Suzuki GSX 8R with the 2024 Suzuki GSX R600. So these are different class bikes. One is a street sport bike, one is a super sport bike, and there's strengths to each one. And if you're looking for just a comparison on the specs, these do not compete directly spec for spec with each other. But what they do is offer, offer a sport bike for the street and a little more track focused bike. Now, when I was younger, everybody wanted a super sport bike. They were a little bit more comfortable than they are today, and these street sport bikes were basically street bikes that didn't really have a whole lot of sport other than some styling. So in this video, we're gonna show you why street sport bikes are becoming far more popular and super sport bikes are fading a little bit in popularity because there's a narrower market for the super sport bike and a broader market for the street sport bike now that street sport bikes have stepped up their game. So that's what this video is about. Before we go too far, I want to thank McLean Sports for giving me complete access to their entire vehicle lineup. If you guys have questions about anything motorcycle-wise, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, but also thank McLean's here, leave them a like, that kind of thing, because they give me access, which means I get to come back to you, even if you're not their direct customer. I get to come back to you and answer your questions and give you as much information as I can. Just, you know, anything you're interested in, you can let me know in the comments and I'll come back to you both in future videos and in future comments. And this bike's already been on video here, so this is an example of something that I'm coming back to help answer more questions. So before we go direct comparison to comparison, piece by piece, and I start explaining why one bike works better for one situation than the other, let's just set the class and expand on what I said earlier. A lot of the time, these street sport bikes were what we used to call standard bikes. They had sort of a standard seating position. They would tweak the foot position. They would put a fairing on it. It would look like a sport bike, and therefore it would be a sport bike. And as time moved on, those of us who bought bikes started to realize, hey, this thing really isn't that sporty, and therefore we want to move to a super sport. And the super sports were kind of getting pushed and pushed and pushed. And if you've ever driven a true race car, which most people haven't, but I've been in a couple cars which are true race cars. If you've ever driven a true race car on the street, you'll probably hate it. I mean, sure, it'll be fun for a little bit, but it's really not made for the street. And what's happening with these super sport bikes is they are so focused and so good at the track, they're still not true race bikes like a modern race bike, but they are becoming a little less versatile, and the sporting capability is far beyond the average rider. So here's a simple bar graph with my hands. If your riding capability is here, and your motorcycle is here, you will probably have all the enjoyment you need. But if this bike is comfortable, you will also have the comfortable. If your riding ability is here and your sport bike capability is here, then you're still gonna have all the sporting capability, but you may make sacrifices by having a bike like this that you don't wanna make. Now again, this is a great bike for a lot of people, but this one's more popular for a reason, and Suzuki's dumping more money into this type of bike than they are this type of bike right now, and I think that makes some sense given what they're doing. So let's go through part by part and talk about which one's great for you. All right, now I talked about these bikes being totally different class. Let's look at the GSX R600 here. This one, of course, is a 4-cylinder bike. Even though it has less displacement, a 600cc roughly, it's going to have less, or it's going to have more power than the roughly 800, which is actually just a hair under 800cc. But this one's going to have more power because of the 4-cylinder. And again, we're not going to go over specs. What we're going to start doing is looking at what makes a super sport. So first of all, you have these tires here. They are 120/70 ZR17 tires. So basically 120 series tires. You're gonna have this size tire on a whole lot of bikes. Now, for most super sport bikes, these tires are a little bit grippier. They also perform the best when they have a lot of heat in them, which isn't something you can always do on the road. So sometimes road tires can be, pure road tires, or certainly pure road tires, can be grippier than even slicks because the slicks usually have to get warm. So something worth remembering, just because a tire has more grip, it may not have more grip in the situations that you ride. But what we're looking at here in a true super sport is you have the upside down forks, or the inverted forks. Somebody wanted me to call them that the other day. Doesn't really matter what you call them. What that does is create a stiffer area up top and less unsprung weight down here. that helps performance. Now, SuperSports nowadays all have these happen to be Brembo brakes, but they're radial mounted brakes. So this is a specific mounting way, and I want you to sort of pay attention to how that is mounted, almost like this Y type figure there. This is a performance mounting. It's the stiffest way to mount them in current bikes, at least that they do right now. And this is also a performance piece. So upside down forks allow adjustability. The brakes there allowed good stiffness. And again, this wasn't always like this on a street bike, but you're going to see in a second they brought that to the GSX 8R. So this kind of mounting, vented disc, dual discs, of course. The Brembos are going to be more popular or more powerful. They're also going to be a little more heat resistant. So you can come from, 250 kilometers an hour right down to zero several times in a row and not have the brake fade. But the brakes on the other bike are very good as well. So lightweight wheels, dual disc brakes with lots of ventilation, radial mount, upside down forks. That's a SuperSport bike. All right, moving to the street sport bike. I love these because they're such different colors. It's obvious which bike I'm on, so I don't really have to announce it, but I did anyways. All right, 120/70 ZR17, exact same size of tire, a little different compound, but again, street sport bikes, just the same thing. So you have the same size tire here. You have lightweight wheels. You have the dual disc brakes. ABS, you can see on this one, you've got ABS probably on that one. Maybe not. Sometimes the super sport bikes that has an option, but you've got ABS brakes here. Again, that's great for the road. Upside down forks, so that it gives you stiffness up top. That gives you less unsprung weight down here, and although they're not Brembo brakes, they're mounted that same exact way. Again, stiffness is there, so you've got all the performance components. So again, you're gaining a lot of performance. They used to have weaker brakes, they used to have heavier wheels and tires. Again, it was more of a styling experience. They used to have right side up forks that were simple forks, but again, you're gaining a lot here. Now this one doesn't happen to have adjustable suspension. Some bikes do have adjustable suspension, but again, for most people, the level of adjustment on a Super Sport is more than they're ever going to adjust. These ones are tuned very well, and the brakes have been coming back rated very well, even for occasional track use. So again, if you're driving this most of the time on the road and want to head to the track with it once or twice, absolutely great. If you're living at the track, the other one's probably going to be something better for you, potentially, but maybe not. You could upgrade some pieces here and have just the same type of experience. So front wheels, much more the same than they used to be. All right, so looking at the heart of this bike, we could talk about engines all day long, but that's not the focus of this video. What I want to talk about is a lot of super sport bikes have kind of unique frames here. You can see that sort of, sweeping design here instead of something like a tubular frame, which was more common in a road bike. So you've got some bodywork here, which is certainly part of the aerodynamics and the styling, but this frame design here is always something that you see on super sport bikes. It allows it to be a little lighter, a little stiffer. They can put things in stiffness where they want it, that kind of thing. But yeah, you have that full coverage. The engine sort of shows here, but it's sort of built into the bodywork. Lightweight foot pegs, lightweight brake pedal there. But that's one of the big things you see here is these sort of custom frames here. And I say custom as not something that is shared with multiple bikes across multiple lines, which you see more in the street sport lineup. So you can see that there. Let's go over to the GSX 8R. So moving to the street sport bike, you can kind of see the similar style frame, the tubular frame. Now again, this is a little bit more shared platform, but they give you some of that style. Obviously on this particular bike, a little bit more of the engine is showing, but you still have pretty good styling up front. I mean, a little bit more coverage down here with some of the panels on the super sport bike, but essentially you've got, from a styling perspective, very, very similar. You've got this big, deep lower fairing here as well that comes all the way back. Fairly lightweight steel-only plugs or metal-only plugs or pegs, and metal-only brake pads, so no rubber padding on there. So again, you've got the full super sport look here. Now, one thing I like on these street sport bikes is, again, if you want to leave it stock, you've got your catalytic converter down there, which is, again, necessary to make it pass emissions across the world and noise regulations, but you have this exhaust that ends here. See, the catalytic converter does all the stuff that you need it to do for emissions and to make it street legal and that kind of thing. So you don't, I mean, there are ways to upgrade exhaust on this kind of bike, don't get me wrong, but what I like is by putting this on, you eliminate the need for a pipe out here, and that keeps your weight central. So this actually assists you in handling. Now, you don't see that on super sport bikes with the exhaust here, because a lot of time you're gonna swap out that pipe, swap out the exhaust system, swap out different things, especially as you start tuning that. But if you're not gonna be heavy into tuning and you just want a good street sport bike from the factory, this will actually help with handling, because this is a fairly heavy piece, but by keeping that heavy piece low, no extra pieces up high, that's gonna make the bike feel a little bit more nimble for a street sport bike, so it's gonna have that good handling. So simple stuff that you've got in here. You can see sort of the subframe, so cool styling here, but also very super sport type feel to the street sport bike. So back over here on the GSX R600, in other words, the super sport bike, you can see that pipe that we were talking about on that bike, but really what we're looking at is the rear tire here. Now, super sport bikes tend to have, and this one is a good example of a 180 55 ZR15 tire. So that's pretty common sizing for a super sport 600. And what that does is give you a nice wide look, but it also allows a whole bunch of sport tire options, especially if you want to go right up to slicks on the track. You have that option there on that super sport bike. So let's take a look at the street sport bike now. Moving over to a modern street sport bike, you used to have a 160 tire, but instead now on the Suzuki, you have a 180 55 ZR17 tire. In other words, you have the exact same size tire as a super sport. So what that means is your street sport bike can swap on new shoes for the racetrack. It can swap on a whole bunch of variety of sport type tires from all kinds of manufacturers, and you can get the ride that you want. Some tires are going to have a little bit more of a pointed profile, so there's a little bit narrower area here, so it tips in a little easier. So if you want a bike that tips in a little easier, that's a common thing that they do on super sport bikes. You can add those tires to this bike. So that's kind of the nice thing with these street sport bikes. Same size tires, same style brakes, similar styling. But let's take a look at some of the dash and the other stuff. We're going to start with the GSX-R. All right, so on the super sport bike here, we're fully wide angle on the camera here. It's going to skew the view on the edges and that kind of thing, but it offers you a pretty typical super sport type experience. You can see you've got the adjustable suspension up top, Showa suspension, lots of adjustment for compression and rebound on both sides there. And that's a pretty common thing. The other thing is your clip-ons tend to drop below. So your handlebars essentially drop below this piece here to give you that more hunched over look. We're going to talk about that in just a second, but let's take a look at the dash here. Let me just move the camera. Actually, I didn't realize I'm not quite on the perfect angle, so I'm going to move the camera a second. We're going to take a look at the dash on this bike. All right, so Suzuki has realized one thing. A lot of people like a fancy TFT display, but if you're heading to the track, it's not something you really need. A lot of people also like a more traditional style tachometer. Now you'll notice Suzuki does a traditional style tachometer on their TFT display, but an actual, in some cases, a downgrade. Now, we're not here to go through all of the information in the dash. There's a lot of it here. But for a lot of people, moving up to this more expensive bike actually gives you a downgrade in the dash. Now, again, the features are all there. They all work really well. But it is interesting to see that Suzuki understands, hey, we could put a fancy dash in this, but this is selling as much as we want it to sell without that fancy dash. Now, again, there are a lot of components in this bike that are upgrades that you don't see. Something like a steering damper is standard on this bike. There's a lot of pieces. Again, that suspension, we're skipping over a lot here, but there is quite a bit of things that you don't see. But the things you do see, things like the dash here, they are actually a downgrade over the street sport bikes right now. So over here on the street sport bike, the GSX 8R, I want to be really clear. This still has, see this little yellow tab you see in the corner of your page? This still has, or corner of your screen there, this still has the plastic sort of screen protector that comes on this bike. I don't really want to take it off, but that is going to make it much harder to film. I can see through it in person, but it certainly adds a lot of glare to the filming. But again, and actually see that flicker there, that flicker is not there in real life. But again, if you take a look at this dash here, you can see that you've still got a lot more information. Again, this display is far easier for me to read in person. You still have a traditional style tachometer in their display, but you've got all these fancy things. Things like a quick shifter is standard on this GSX 8R. That used to be something that you would only have on a super sport bike. Drive modes, traction control modes, all those kinds of things. You used to have reduced power modes in super sport bikes, but not so much in regular sport bikes. You do have that here. Multiple levels of traction control. So there's a lot of features here that you get, and a little bit easier to read dash. This is a much more modern dash. When you're riding this bike, you feel like you're riding something more modern, certainly from a view perspective, from the visual perspective, than you would on a super sport. Now coming fully, let's go fully zoomed out again here. Again, this is going to skew the edges on the outside. A couple things that you notice here: Suzuki has an adjustable brake lever, but not an adjustable clutch lever. That's actually the same as a super sport bike from Suzuki. So you've got different controls here to deal with a different screen. To me, I find these less confusing. I find the TFT display is a little less confusing. And the other thing you're going to find is the handlebars rise up over the suspension. So that's going to give you a different riding position. We're going to take a look at riding position right now. So the riding position on a sport bike really matters, and if you're gonna go to the track, you're gonna want a super sport bike. This does a number of things for you, just like a road bicycle with the drop bars, you know, those curly handlebars, a road bicycle, they put you down. That helps with aerodynamics. So that's part of the reason you're down in this position. The other part of the reason is your body is kind of centered low to the bike. So remember the engine, we want it low and forward on a motorcycle. I don't know if you've seen in my other videos, probably didn't point out as much in this video, but what you wanna do is get low and centered on this bike as well. So what you can do is you can get into a really good tuck position. Your chest can go right flat on that flat tank and get really down low here and still see out in front of you. You'll notice that the mirrors are mounted out in front of you on the fairing. On a naked bike or on a regular bike, a lot of times they're mounted on the handlebars, and when you get in a tuck position, your mirrors are still behind you. So on a true super sport bike, mirrors are in front of you, you can get nice and low, but this is as comfortable as you can get. For some people, this puts a little extra pressure on their wrists. This is not a super comfortable touring position. Now, I will say, it's not that uncomfortable for me, but it's certainly, you know, you can see I'm leaned over. It's not the most comfortable motorcycle out there. The other thing is, you have very high foot pegs. Now the foot pegs, if you've ever seen a bike going around a track, they have to be high to avoid dragging on the ground and allow you to basically drag your elbow. And if you're really good elbow and shoulder on the ground, I can't drive like that. I'm not that good. So having these foot pegs high is great, but they're higher than I will ever need them to be. And that can be less comfortable for some people. So we'll leave that one there and we'll jump on the street sport bike. Street sport bike, which I left on by the way. You can see here, foot pegs are lower. Now again, I'm still not scraping pegs. Maybe I'll scrape pegs on a racetrack. If I want to get low, the tank is still nice and flat, the mirrors are still out in front of me, and I can do that, but majority of the time, I'm in a much more comfortable position, a little bit extra wind protection for the higher body position. So even though the angle of the windshield, or the height of the windshield is low, the angle is a little bit higher up. So it's gonna give you a little bit of chest protection, gonna take some of that wind off your body. Your helmet's still gonna get that clean air. But you have a very sporty look to it. If you wanna get tucked in that position, you can. If you wanna ride more comfortably around town, you have a more upright position. You can see through traffic better. And that's why these are more popular. Again, riding skill is here. If your bike is above it, doesn't matter how much above, right? This gives you the extra comfort, which allows you to take a passenger maybe a little bit more comfortably and know sort of where they are. They can hold on to you. If you're leaned way over like this, your passenger could sometimes be a long ways from your body. It's a little harder to feel, but it's also great for more sport touring, that kind of thing. It makes for a more comfortable position. Now there's a couple other little quick things I want to look at the front of this bike, and then we're going to talk about which bike is best for you. On the 2024 Suzuki GSX R600, you have an incandescent headlight, high beam and low beam, a little bit larger. That's going to give it a little bit more dated look, and you have signal lights in the mirrors. So that's a common way to sort of put those signal lights in a way that it's not extra aerodynamic drag. Some put them in the bodywork. This is a good position for visibility. It's higher, that kind of thing, but there is a bit of a dated look there. When you go to the modern street sport bike, not everybody loves this look, and we'll zoom in a little bit there. You can see you've got the dual headlight look, 1, 2, and then the daytime running lights just above in that sort of slot there. But you do have certainly a more modern, sort of less frontal area light, and that does look a little bit more modern. This looks like the more modern bike. Signal lights are out on the stocks like they would be on a typical bike, and that is also very good. You have LED signal lights and LED headlights instead of incandescent bulbs on the GSX-R. So you get a little bit more modern look. And again, this is Suzuki acknowledging that, hey, this is where we're putting our money right now, because this is going to be sold to people who want that engine, want that performance, want that track type bike. And this is going to sell to people for a whole bunch of reasons. So let's talk about who should buy each bike. So when we talk about which bike is right for you, the great thing is that these street sport bikes have increased their performance. It used to be that if your riding level was here, the street sport bike may be here, and then you needed to go to the super sport bike, which means you lost comfort, you lost practicality, you lost a bunch of little things, and sometimes you would lose some technology. In this bike, again, TFT display. Now what's happened is they've increased that street sport bike to be above the average rider's ability. That's a good thing, because what that means is sometimes you used to buy a super sport bike because you say, hey, I want to have the occasional track day. And if you want an occasional track day, this bike can absolutely handle it. You can even swap your tires out and do that kind of thing. The brakes as is are fine, but they're simple to upgrade, and the design is all there, so you're doing less stuff. Sometimes you can just upgrade the brake pads. There's lots of things you can do, but even just taking it as is to the track for the occasional track day, this is going to be fine for the average rider. Now, if you've been riding a street sport bike for a while and you really want to go to the track more often, or if you just want the power, then this is a great option as well. However, there are still more comfortable options if you just want the power. This is going to have better handling at the limits, but again, if you're just driving down country roads, there's not a strong advantage to this. You can't get leaned over so far that this offers such a huge advantage over that one. At least you can't get that lean over that far on regular country roads or typical typical rural roads at road legal speeds or just above road legal speeds. You have to be so far above road legal speeds to need the extra performance that this offers, that this makes more sense for most people. That's why you don't see some of the updates in the dash, some of the updates in the lighting, because Suzuki realized that if they take a street sport bike, bring that level up above the average rider, this is going to be a bike that is just as sporty for you as this one, but it's going to offer more practicality, more comfort. Now, one thing worth noting, this 2-cylinder does make less power. Now, it does have a torquey engine. This one has a lot of high revving engine. Again, red line on this one is 15,000 RPM. Red line on this one I think is around 10,000 RPM. So you're revving a lot, and a lot of the power is up high in this rev range. This one may actually feel a little bit more peppy at road speeds depending on where you are. Adding the quick shifter on this bike, having the great brakes, having well-tuned suspension for a sporty but still comfortable ride makes this more enjoyable. So my take is, if you're looking at a sport bike, probably stay away from the super sport bike unless you know for sure that that's what you want. Street sport bikes have stepped it up. This is one of the best ones out there right now, and that's why Suzuki's dumping their money into it, and maybe you should as well. So let me know in the comments what you think. Do me a favor, if you made it this far in the video, leave a like, maybe hit that subscribe button. I review bikes all the time. Love to see your comments as well. Helps my channel, it helps these dealers know that we're getting some spread, and of course, the more they see, the more I'm allowed to do this. So thanks everybody for watching. We'll talk to you in the next one.